Yeah, I did want to sort of make sure that you guys all sort of know who I am and who Naomi is and who's sponsoring this event, who's behind it. My name is Madeira Mason. I'm the Associate Director for Teaching and Learning with UAF eCampus. I'm also the founding partner for the Faculty Accelerator, which is the primary faculty development sort of clearinghouse at UAF. And Naomi, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Sure. Hi, I'm Naomi Hechquist, and I am the Communications Specialist for Alaska EPSCoR. And I am also a graduate of UAF. I went through the Digital Art department, and so I'm really excited about NFTs for lots of different purposes. And then I guess I'll hand it over to Peter to introduce Center ICE.
Yes, thanks, Naomi. So sponsor of the event today that brings Madeira and Naomi and all of us together is Alaska Center ICE, Innovation, Commercialization and Entrepreneurship, based at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, but has a footprint across the University of Alaska. So we support innovative ideas, innovative research, and also those commercializing and moving technologies out of the university. So we felt that this was a interesting event, but also an interesting topic to bring in and the potential uses of this technology that's out there, and we hear about in the news and what those might be for academic uses. So pass it back to Madeira and Naomi, and thanks everybody for coming today.
Yeah, and Mark Billingsley is here today too with OIPC, and I think the intellectual property arena is seeing some interest in the NFT space too. So it's nice to see you here, Mark. So I'm just going to skip to this next slide here and make sure that everybody knows that Naomi and I are not experts in this area. We are just really curious. I think she and I have both been sort of following this space a little bit because of our interest in digital art. And I've been following sort of the crypto space for quite some time now. I'm not super great with the technology, but I'm very interested in the use cases. And that's really what I'm going to be talking about. We are coming at this from the perspective that NFTs are likely to play an important role in the future, that they're really sort of a burgeoning and very much in its infancy type of technology, and that an institution like UAF would be well served by looking into a technology like this early on and trying to be an early adopter in this space rather than waiting until somebody else has claimed that first mover advantage, I think. So really what we're looking to do here is to just kind of daydream about some possibilities and talk about how we might move forward in the future and what we can do for fun here. We've got a shared document. If somebody could throw the link to that shared document in the chat. Oh, somebody already did. Yeah, thank you. So there's a document there that's really got a lot of the content from some of our slides and plenty of places for folks to add questions and ideas and that sort of thing. We're really thinking about this document as an open collaborative document, so feel free to make a mess. So without further ado, we'll get started here. The known issues, I kind of wanted to cover these right off the bat because I know that there are quite a few issues that give people pause, and I think it probably should in this space. First of all, sorry about that. The idea of value and how and whether an NFT carries value with it sort of intrinsically. Like anything, I think that's very much based on the communities that are sort of investing value in this space, right? So value is very dependent on the human communities that are attached to this technology. We are very aware that there is a significant environmental impact, especially for what's known as proof of work blockchains rather than proof of stake blockchains. What Naomi and I have been really talking about is NFTs that are grounded in the proof of stake blockchains, because those do not have the same kind of environmental impact. But I just wanted to sort of briefly touch on that because I know that that could become sort of its own webinar, basically. So we're aware that that's there. The evolving and inconsistent vocabulary around this space can sometimes be really difficult to deal with. People refer to different things in varying ways. And for me, at least, it can be a little bit confusing. And we also know that scams are sort of a real fact of life in the NFT space right now. So buyer or investigator beware, I guess. a very brief technical point that I kind of want to cover before I get into these use cases that we've dreamed up here. And I think Naomi is going to get into some of the more technical aspects here soon. And this is important for the use cases, I think. One of the problems that blockchain technology solves is this idea of centralized databases being stored on servers. Centralized databases are a single point of failure, right? If that server goes down, or if the person who is in control of the database or the entity that's in control of the database decides to get rid of all the information that's stored in that database, there's not really much anybody can do about it. What decentralized blockchain technologies do for us is they allow us to have a system basically of information that is trustless and immutable, because everybody basically is verifying that the information stored on the blockchain is there. That's an actually sort of a groundbreaking and kind of earth-shattering piece of technology, honestly. The more you start to investigate this space and the more you start to think about it, the idea of decentralized databases, decentralized blockchains is, I mean, it's really kind of amazing. So I just wanted to sort of touch on that just a little bit, because I think that's going to play a role in some of the use cases that we're talking about here. Those of you who know anything about NFTs or have heard anything or read any of the news articles, I think are probably going to see some of the insane values attached to like Bored Apes and things like that. We're not really interested in that particular case, those popularized cases. What I think we're really investigating here is like, how can a university actually sort of use this technology and think about this technology in ways that benefit us or improve what we try to do in higher education. So those are the cases that we're going to be looking at. And I am kind of trying to buzz through this so that we can have a conversation at the end of this, but please stop me if you have questions, or if you want to just interject and throw a comment in, I'm totally fine with that. Okay, so I'm going to cover 5 use cases here. I have no idea how feasible these things would be. It's just that these are the types of ideas that Naomi and I were getting excited about when we were talking about, and Mark and Peter too. I think we were having a lot of fun generating this idea of like, how could NFTs be used to solve problems, or to create new value where none existed before. One of the first things we talked about was the idea of NFT-based ticketing and access. So a couple of different ideas in here. The tickets, theoretically, if they're attached to the NFT space, they could unlock special privileges for students and incentivize engagement in things like the sports events and that sort of thing. It can give access to events or locations. It can create and verify rarity in Nanook sports memorabilia or licensed clothing. And generating interest in marketing opportunities for those interested in the tech. So those were just some ideas around NFT ticketing and access. Naomi, did you want to add anything to that, or Peter or Mark too, because this is one of the things that we had talked about?
Yeah, I guess I'll just add that, like, you know, it as you're saying, NFTs don't necessarily have to be attached to a digital asset. They can totally be a physical, they can be attached to physical objects as well, or access. So you're saying these events or things like, if you think of it like a concert ticket, where you have like a VIP access, or you have just like a regular ticket holder, those different levels are easily done with NFTs. And I think that's a really exciting avenue of how NFTs could be applied to lots of different, you know, sporting events here, but also other events that the university puts on.
Yeah. Peter, Mark, anything to add?
Yeah, we were excited to do this at the university as sort of an educational thing. And it's fun. It's real technology that's gonna, like what Eric said, play a big part in the future. So let's try it out in some, you know, low risk, high fun use cases at the university. That's sort of how we've been going about this. This isn't trying to create, you know, some really, you know, $2.5 million NFT. And then we're just, you know, once you start thinking about all the different opportunities, like what Eric's going through here, like, oh, this could be so fun to do in all these different instances. So now, you know, we're sort of in this stage of, all right, well, what's a really good first use case to do it in?
Anything else, Peter?
No, I was just highlighting is the aspect. I think that special privileges aspect of it, you know, incentment is incentivizing connections and engagement. It could be anything from the rarity of a signed Nanook hockey jersey to know that it is an evidence that it came from, signed by all the hockey players, or a hockey stick signed by the team that won the Governor's Cup or whatever. Then you do an NFT around that, so it's got sort of, it's like a proof that it is what it is. It says it is, and the same thing could be for the tickets for a tour of the hockey, or the hockey changing rooms during the summer time or something like that, working with a Carlson Center. So those type of things where you're connecting it to a rarity of an item that, as Naomi says, is a physical item, or it's a ticket with a specific access that then is connected to that NFT, and only those individuals have that access and have that key or that connection to it.
Nice. All right, I'm going to skip to the next use case, or the ideas anyways. The idea of digital asset creation and distribution, sort of continual distribution. One of the things that folks have talked about is the creation of gaming assets. And I think this space is actually really pretty well developed at this point, or semi-well developed anyways. I think a lot of people are in this space and creating gaming assets that are based on NFTs, and they're trading those assets using the NFT technologies. Which I think is fascinating. But I mean, you know, we're teaching students, well, first of all, we have an esports program, right? And second of all, I think that especially in the sort of degree programs that involve business and things like that, or even computer coding, that allowing students to actually create real things that are tied to real blockchain platforms, I think could be a fascinating thing. And because of the way NFTs and smart contracts work, students theoretically could earn money from assignments and earn money in perpetuity too, which is one of the things that digital artists find fascinating, and anybody who creates digital assets at all, I think, find fascinating. Similarly, the idea of badging certain skills. So, I mean, even just badging, say an English 111 class where you've got people learning how to do proper citation, MLA citation format, right? What if I gave a student a badge that said, hey, I'm able to properly cite things in MLA? Not that exciting for the student, but it could be an interesting way to sort of show what specific skills students are acquiring as they go throughout their college career, because an A doesn't necessarily mean anything significant, right? That's not a lot of detail. An A just says you successfully passed a class. It doesn't necessarily say that you acquired a specific skill. I've seen plenty of students go through something like English 111 and pass it and get an A because they were writing great papers, but they still might have had a hole sort of in that citation skill, right? So this could sort of follow students there. Similarly, with occupational endorsements and certificates, those could be verified by employers using NFT technologies in a way that kind of cuts out the middleman of UAF having to act as the primary distributor of things like diplomas, certificates, and occupational endorsements. And I cover that in another use case as well. But just in terms of thinking about digital assets and how they travel through the internet and how we can show ownership, I think is interesting. Did you guys want to add anything to this one?
Yeah, so in the growing world of micro credentials, these little things, not physically little, but micro, more and more of them, little pieces of paper or something you put on your resume, not really verified. Imagine a world where they all exist on a single sheet for somebody to go look at, or in a single platform where they can all be posted there. And maybe that'll get developed over the next 10 years or so. It doesn't exist yet, but we could even sort of start developing that internally, and people could go off and show it. And we could just start testing it out and trying it out.
Absolutely.
I was going to add to that. You mentioned about skills awarded, like a lab equipment access or ability to use equipment we've spoken about in the past, makerspace use. But the other thing that often is hard to recognize and reference is when you're doing a resume and you say, I've got good communication skills. How do you recognize good communication skills? You can say, I've got a PowerPoint level 3 ability, but a good communication skill, when someone looks at it, it's like, Okay, are you able to talk for an hour, or are you able to talk for an hour usefully about something? So how, as you say, like English 101 is like, you've got the ability to get the grade, but have you got something recognized for your written comprehension? Have you got something recognized for your verbal comprehension? So when somebody looks at it and goes, oh, good communication skills, but it's got connected back to something that is tangible, that rather than just saying human skills or soft skills, whatever terms you want to use, you've got, I'm a good communicator. Okay, to what level? How do you give a tangible connection to that? And then that could be something that could be connected. Obviously, you'd have to have some form of reference to what that corresponds to if somebody's got over here versus a different organization. But that's one possibility of a skill that you've acquired during your degree, that when you graduate, you've got that again next to you, as well as your certificate, as well as your degree, as well as your GPA, is those human skills that often can be the difference maker when you're applying for a job.
Exactly. And, I mean, anybody who's been on LinkedIn knows that they've got those certifications that you can get by taking quizzes and things like that. I think I have the Photoshop certification or something like that. But the problem with that system is that LinkedIn owns that, right? You have to become a part of LinkedIn. You have to engage in their system in order to have that verification. With NFTs and blockchain technology, what it allows us to do as individuals is to own our identity, right? And things attached to our identity. So it's not that LinkedIn can't own my certifications and verifications that way. I can own them and I can take them with me wherever I go, because wherever I go, they're always going to be verified by the blockchain. And I don't have to rely on basically a proprietary system to do that for me. Okay. Use case number 3, this is very much related, and it's kind of just a continuation of thought here, really, about the things that we're talking about, but allowing students to own their diploma and take that diploma and the transcript specifically with them. If you apply for a new job, often they will ask you for a transcript. How did you do in college? They want to see an actual official verification that you took classes and got the diploma, right? If anybody's had to do that with UAF, I think we have to, is it $25? How much is it? It's like $5. Anyways, there's a fee attached to it if you ask for your official transcript, and there's a delay on that, right? It can take anywhere from 24 to 72 hours to get that official transcript, maybe even longer than that. So the reason why I'm paying and waiting for that information is because it's in a centralized database. UAF has it all locked up inside of UAF systems, right? If we put diplomas on, and I think some universities are already exploring this space, if we put diplomas on any kind of a blockchain and attach it to NFTs, then I get to own that information. I don't have to go back to UAF and ask them for those things. I own that information. I own the truthiness of it too, right? Right now, UAF owns the truthiness of that. I could theoretically own that truthiness, and that information could be mine, which I find valuable. Any other sort of additional thoughts on top of this one?
Yeah, also, it's sort of thinking about, let's say you're requesting your official transcripts from 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and you're having to go, well, where do I go? Who's the person? And then, whereas if you had your transcript when you leave with that information on top of it, then it's on your computer, and if you send it to somebody as whatever the file format is with this information on it, as long as they're able to accept it in that format, you've got it, as you say, you own it and it's in your possession. It's still got to have the university's information on there to say that you've gone through and got that GPA and it connects back, but you would at least have your own sort of remote roaming official that you wouldn't have to, you apply for a job 10 years after you graduated and the applicant, the organization says, we need to see your university transcripts. I'm like, but I've been working for 10 years. They still may ask for your official transcripts, no matter where you're applying, or you're applying for some continuing education. They want they want to see your GPA from 10 years ago. But you've got to remember who's the admissions officer, all this information. You wouldn't have to do that. You just pull it out of your own own files and send it to the employer, and it would have that connection back. But you wouldn't have to be going back to the original institution every single time you needed another version of your official transcripts. So it does make for the individual a more seamless process when you're needing access to older documents where you.
Oh, you muted yourself halfway through that sentence, Peter.
Sorry, I was trying to mute myself and I did it too quickly.
Gotcha. Yeah. And I mean, it works for potential employers too, right? Like if they have any questions about the veracity of your diploma, they can check it on the blockchain themselves. They don't have to go to UAF. They can see whether that information exists in the same form that you gave it to them by looking at the blockchain themselves, which could be super helpful. And sort of similar to that, I think I think a continuing thread running through here is this idea that, information about me is stored all over these proprietary systems. It's stored in Facebook, it's stored in Google, it's stored in all these different places. That's a little frustrating for a lot of us, right? Because our information gets sold and traded and all that sort of things. And we never even know about it. Like it gets sold off to other companies and we have no idea that that's even happening. If our IDs are attached instead to blockchain technologies, it allows me to decide whether I want to sell or trade my information or not. And it also allows for me to earn potentially money if somebody decides to use my information, right? So I could say, sure, keep demographic information about me, anonymized, hopefully, in your system and use it so that you can sort of analyze these big data sets, which is a really valuable thing in our contemporary world. But it allows me to make that decision, right? It's not being traded and sold behind my back, basically, without my permission. I'm doing the selling and the trading and potentially making money off of that. The Brave browser that uses the BAT tokens, they actually are basically paying people to do things like watch YouTube videos or look at commercials and things like that. So people are getting paid basically for their interaction with the systems rather than the systems just blindly selling everything. But in terms of like the academic use case here, I mean, the student IDs could be tied to an NFT ecosystem in that same way and allow for more secure verification that students are who they say they are. Now, this might not be much of an issue, except when you start talking about things that are high stakes, like the testing, the proctored exams, right? Like students have to show their IDs. And because I work in eCampus, I'm very familiar with how often students are trying to get away with coming in to take tests for other people. They have to show their ID, they have to verify who they are. It's sort of a time-consuming process. And I know that for some universities, this is an even larger problem than it is for UAF. And theoretically, that would allow for better verification that a student is who they say they are. Similarly, as somebody who manages a number of databases, I have to be concerned about whether there is a security breach of any student-related information, right? So anytime you tie student information to other types of information, like what degree program they're in or anything like that, you're running the risk of somebody accessing that system and figuring out information about students that it really isn't supposed to be out there. Their grades, their demographic information, that sort of thing. By using NFT technologies and smart contracts, what you allow for basically is the uncoupling of that personal identification information being attached to that other information. Now it's still there, but it's not accessible, right? Because it's decentralized basically on that blockchain. So that could be a pretty helpful thing, I think. Mark, Peter, Naomi, anybody want to add to that one?
I think
I was just thinking, sorry, go ahead, Mark.
they might be the most expansive of the one of the most expansive of the options we've already talked about here, but it's kind of hard for me to even, I think this is what's going on right now. It's hard to even think of all the different ways that this could impact us in the future. Just sort of starting to hack away at some of them, we probably will discover more and more. Yeah,
and I was going to add in that your use cases could be combined. So you had use case, the first one of VIP access to a Nanux event. Well, how about if you go to the gym and use the gym, those that reach a certain number of NFTs are then eligible to get one of the VIP tickets. So it's the process. You think of the old process, you earn points, and if you earn 100 points, you get access to something else. There's many ways that people do that. You say that, yes, I did this, I took this, I took that, and you get 100 points, and you've got to the next level. The NFTs is the 2022 and beyond version of that type of thing. It's you could do academic pursuits, earn enough NFTs to get access to some funding, or you could be eligible for some funding, or you could be eligible for the next one, and therefore that Polar Express tracking smart contracts could then tap into some of those VIP access programs, rather than like applying a competition type of processes. It's actually connected to you doing something on campus, and therefore you get people competing internally, but you're using that NFT to build to another NFT based off that other use case. So that was something I put in the document, that you could even connect across these use cases.
Awesome. And I think a really important thing to point out here for those of us who are sort of involved in higher education as something other than a student, that can all be automated, right? Normally that type of tracking and delivery of goods based on activity has to be managed by people on the back end. The beauty of this and the NFTs and smart contracts is that you build that exchange into the contract itself, and it gets automatically, the incentive that you want to deliver is automatically built into that contract. It means that there's no middleman there who has to do the work of making that transfer and tracking that activity, right? And we save capacity that way. So that's a tremendous thing. And for those students who are thinking about getting out into the business world, I mean, this could be a way to really like make yourself shine as a new employee, is by automating certain processes that right now are taking people exhausting amounts of time to complete. And allowing them to work in more meaningful ways than just tracking data, right? Which I think sometimes can be a little bit boring. Okay, so here's my last one. The idea of real or digital property ownership, and these are all sort of connected and kind of overlapping in some ways, but theoretically, faculty, students, anybody could be minting any individual or unique research that they're doing, and proving that, yes, this is my work. Nobody else created it. I created it. I'm the one who did this. And that way, as the paper or the research travels throughout the internet, it carries that ID with it, because it's inextricably tied. Now, it's not a 100% perfect solution. Forgeries and cheating and things like that can still happen, but it's far more difficult on a blockchain than it is in a centralized database. I mean, I think this could, change especially the research world and how papers are currently sort of mishandled in the publishing world right now. I know that's a real struggle for a lot of faculty. I also think this one's kind of weird, but interesting. Real property theoretically could be tied to these VR spaces that are starting to emerge. So Decentraland and Metaverse are both examples of these virtual realities. I mean, it's kind of like Second Life, right? But in Second Life, basically, you could build something and say, oh, this is UAF, this is the official UAF. And it could be harder to do, I think, if we're attaching those things to NFT technologies and make like it's the official, like this is the official Gruning building or something. That's the version of it in VR. I don't know exactly how that would work, but I don't know. It was an interesting idea that I came across. And this last one, the third one in the bullet points there, I think is one that I'm not 100% sure about, but I do wonder about this one. I know that often Indigenous communities see researchers coming in and extracting information about Indigenous communities, subsistence fishing, and things like that, right? In terms of Indigenous values, that's not a great, actually, in terms of just human values, right? Going in and just extracting information without providing a reciprocal sort of gift to the community that you're extracting information from is just kind of rude, you know? But if the Indigenous communities are saying, yes, you can do this research and have this information, but we're going to tie this to a smart contract and tie it to an NFT so that you can't extract anything from our community without our community's ID being attached to it. I think that that could be significant and impactful for lots of people, especially in Alaska. So those are all my use cases and all my ideas. Mark, did you want to add something about this last one?
I think real property, the title search that you pay for when you buy land, like that's going to be gone soon. That's just not going to exist. That
They're
job
already moving in that direction. Yeah.
That's a job that's not going to exist. That's going to be all in the blockchain, not very long from now. And then it's not much of a jump from there to get to chattel's personal property, not physical, not land. And then not much of a jump to get from there to IP, and then anything else that you own or you think you own at the university, your bear bucks on your card, and then transferring that around. So the using the digital ledger to record ownership of property is like one of the most easiest immediate applications.
Yeah. Some I think fields are already being very much changed by this for sure. Naomi, do you want me to turn screen sharing over to you for the rest of this, or are you?
I think you could continue. I just have a couple
Okay.
slides here that I wanted to talk about. So we've been talking about NFTs. We've been throwing around a lot of terms. Probably, I assume most of you that are here have some background knowledge of NFTs. Maybe that's incorrect assumption, but I did want to just talk about a few. So if you want to go to the next slide, I'll talk about NFTs first, just because that's the topic of this this workshop. But NFTs, as we've been saying, are on the blockchain, they're tied to cryptocurrencies. So I do think it's worth mentioning some of the terms that are applicable to blockchain technology as a whole. So the next slide, we have some terms that are just focusing on NFTs. And so an NFT, a non-fungible token, I guess it helps to understand what fungible means. And so if we think about dollar bills or lots of these other cryptocurrencies, like Bitcoin is the easiest one to think about because it's the first, it's the most well-known. So these other coins, these other currencies are interchangeable. You're able to swap a dollar for another dollar, and they're exactly the same. An NFT, or something that's non-fungible, there's nothing of equal value. It's like a painting, it's like an image, it's something that can't be represented by something else and have an equal amount of value. And so it's kind of harder to understand, and that's one sticking point with digital images, because there is that duplication of images, and so that's one reason where people get confused, I think. But a token is something that is representing a larger part of a whole. It's representing something else. So while we're talking about a digital image that might be duplicatable, we're not duplicating the thing that token is representing, the ownership or the property that is behind that image. So that's just a little bit about just non-fungible tokens. But minting is something that I heard Madera mention at least once, and that's just the creation of one of these tokens. So that's creating the code that puts this image that is represented by a string of data onto the blockchain. And once it's there, I guess we'll talk about the blockchain in the next slide. But once it's there, it's not changeable. It's going to be there for as long as the blockchain exists, which is pretty much going to be like the length of the internet. As long as the internet exists, the blockchain will exist. And one thing that's really cool about these NFTs and that we've been talking about is smart contracts. And so a smart contract is really just a piece of code or a program that's located on that blockchain. So it will run when all of the stipulations of that contract are met. So that's what we're talking about when we're saying that there's no middleman. There's nobody that needs to be doing the legwork on the back end of making these things happen. It's all automated on the blockchain. As soon as this transaction happens, as soon as you can think about it in terms of legal documents that already exist. When somebody turns 18, maybe they get access to inheritance or something happens at that time. So, but somebody has to be keeping track of that. So in this case, the somebody keeping track of that is the code, the block that's on the blockchain. So smart contracts are really cool because they are continuous. So if something is happening more than once, it can trigger that contract to happen more than once. So that's one thing that, you know, it's not just like okay, the contract runs and then it's over. This is something that can be reoccurring. So every time something happens, every time this, if then statement is completed, something is happening, something is changing, and so the options for what that is, that's kind of the hard part, is like, what are those, what is the if then statement, what's the event that's triggering the reaction.
So that's like, that's infinite, as much as creative as we can be to think up those various options. The one that comes to mind as, like, I know we're not going into this value NFT space, but you create the NFT, an artist does, or no, turns a piece of artwork into an NFT. NFT sells in addition to the physical artwork, but the NFT sells, and then it resells and resells and resells. They can attach a condition on there that a royalty goes to the original artist every time it resells, so that the artist doesn't sell it for, $30, and then someday it goes on to be worth $3 million, but they don't reap any of the benefit of its increased value. They continue to get value upon each resale, because it was written into the smart contract. That's maybe not the most beautifully stated, but I think you can get the sense of what I'm saying. And that's the application that I think is one of the applications that's interesting and that's already being applied quite regularly.
And musicians, I think, are extremely interested in that, because, I mean, the recording industry has been rife with abuses of artists, basically, where the recording company is making millions upon millions of dollars in these sort of continued sales, but not necessarily giving a kickback to the artist, or not giving them enough of a kickback. And anybody who's seen the sort of inner workings of the art gallery world and the, what's it called, the auction world, I mean, artists are not the ones who are making millions of dollars off of these sales, right? It's the auction houses and the galleries who are making most of the money. And this theoretically could change things. I mean, I think it's going to be a while before it actually changes things, but it could.
Yeah, and that could apply to the university back to, or other nonprofit organizations. It's not just artists that would benefit from this reoccurring royalty. Because if you sell something for, $10 or whatever, and then the person who bought it only gets 50%, or, whatever the percentage may be, they're incentivized to sell it for more so that they get their money back. But then that 50% that's going back to the original artist or going back to the nonprofit agency, that person is also reaping the rewards of somebody else, reselling the original document or the original asset, because every time it's sold, it's selling for more, and they're getting 50% or whatever the percentage that's built into the contract is. So it's mutually beneficial. And the last thing I just wanted to mention here is the gas price. So that's something you might hear when we're talking about NFTs. And again, so NFTs can be minted on several different blockchains, and the price that goes into how much that NFT costs to mint changes depending on which blockchain it's on. So I just wanted to mention that gas price, the fee that's corresponds with minting the NFT, and that just goes into the work that's required to validate the transaction. So to prove that it's true and real. Okay, so that's all I have for NFTs, but like I said, blockchain technology is a big part of non-fungible tokens, and I think that it's worth just mentioning a few of the terms that go into that. So blockchain being the first one. So what is a blockchain? Well, it's, as we've mentioned a couple times, it's just a ledger. It's a record that is not changeable. It's changeable in that you can add to it, but it can't be edited after the fact. And that's because it's distributed across a peer-to-peer network. So you might hear the term nodes when you're looking at research into blockchains. And a node is really just a computer. It's anybody who has access, whose computer has access to that ledger, and who's able to verify whether or not a transaction that's made is authentic or true. And this is in chronological order, and it's a ledger that's comprised of blocks. So each block of data is it's different for each blockchain, but these things are it's kind of what's the word I'm looking for? It's doled out in chunks in these blocks of data, and each block is linked to the block that came before and the block that will precede it. So there's on either side of that block of data. And that's how it's able to go back to any point in time, 10, 15 years, however long ago you're trying to look at information, and it's accurate and it's able to find that information.
Naomi, can I just interject something here real quick?
Yeah.
As I'm listening to you talk, I'm remembering the experience of trying to learn all this stuff and trying to figure it out. And I just want to mention that if anybody's really new to all of this, that's super normal if you're overwhelmed by these terms and really fuzzy on how exactly this is working in terms of the technology. That's normal. I just want to assure everybody that no, you're not an idiot. It's just really difficult to understand. This is a super new space and very new vocabulary.
Right. And that's kind of the reason why I thought going over this list of terms would be useful for anybody who has no idea, who's completely new to NFTs or blockchain technology, because even when you're trying to find out more information, like you're trying to do research, a lot of these articles and a lot of the web pages are built for people who already have some kind of base knowledge. And so they're already using these terms, and you're like, wait, what? Like I only understood half of that sentence, even though it's trying to describe to me what, the information I'm trying to learn. So
I looked at a lot of infographics. Those could be really helpful.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Infographics are a great way to learn new information. And I put in the document that Madera linked in the beginning of this, or it's in the chat now. There's a glossary there that has some really good information. It has even more than just these few. These were just some of the main terms that I thought were worth knowing before diving into any more information. And just the next two, distributed and decentralized, those are kind of interchangeable, but they are a little bit different. So I wanted to just touch on the difference between distributed and decentralized. So something can be distributed while still being centralized. So centralization is talking about who's got the authority, who is the owner of that information. And distributed is where is that information being stored. So like you could have a company that is distributed, we hear about the cloud all the time, and that really what that means is the information is distributed across several different locations. And so if one location goes down, the information is stored in another location. But the decentralization aspect is that, or the centralization aspect of that cloud document is there's still a central owner. There's still one company that owns that information, that's responsible for validating whether or not that information is true. And so that's one thing that is a major benefit of blockchain technology, ideally, is this decentralization, in that nobody is the owner of this information. It's the peers that are making up the network that are responsible for validating whether or not the information is true. And that kind of goes into this trustless agreement, like this idea of trustlessness, which when you hear that trustless, it kind of sounds negative. It kind of sounds like, oh, like you don't trust a stranger. But it is kind of a term that took me a while to wrap my head around, but it's basically saying that everybody has the same information on this network. And so by having that repetition across every single node or every single computer that's part of that network, you can trust that you can trust the transaction is going to be authentic without having to trust any one single individual. And so what that means is if a transaction is altered or corrupted, if somebody tries to hack into the network every computer that's on that network will be able to verify that, no, that is not an accurate, that's not an authentic transaction, and reject it. And there's all kinds of different repercussions depending on the blockchain. But that's the idea of this trustless environment, is that everybody has the same information. It's not just one entity, it's not just one government or one company that is controlling whether or not that information is true. It's everybody has access to it, and everybody can see whether somebody is trying to fake it or not. And that just leads into the last term, which is the validation. And that's just the way that these networks or these blockchains go about making that claim, making that authorization of whether or not the transaction is true or not. And so that process of validation changes. We talked a little bit about proof of stake versus proof of work. And without going too much into it, the main two blockchains that you hear about are Bitcoin and Ethereum. And so both of those right now are proof of work blockchains. And so that means that they're making each node on the computer, each node on the network is making these crazy math calculations to prove that the network is secure, or prove that things are correct. And whereas with the proof of stake blockchain, it's a little bit different. It's just each person on the network is staking or claiming a certain amount of their assets, of their coins, to be a voter, to say like, yes, this is an accurate transaction. And
Ethereum is switching to proof of stake in like 70 days or something like that. It's a big kerfluffle in the whole community. It's a good thing though.
Yeah, it's definitely a good thing, and it'll be big news when that happens. And I guess that just goes into how new all this technology is, and just that things are evolving pretty quickly. All of these blockchains are very new. So that's all I think I have for just talking about these terms.
So, hey, 1 second. So, correct me if I'm not using the right language here. So there's the blockchain technology, and there's the cryptocurrencies are built on them. Maybe there's some that aren't, but I think they're all built on a blockchain. And NFTs are also built on blockchain technology. And I think Ether is the name of the cryptocurrency, and Ethereum is the name of the blockchain technology. I think that's right.
Right. Yeah. So there's the blockchain technology, and you're right. All the cryptocurrencies are based on a blockchain, and Ethereum is the term for the blockchain or the algorithm that's the main overarching cryptocurrency. And then the coins within that currency, like the denominations, are Ether. So you might hear, and then there's even a smaller one. I don't remember what it is right now, because one Ether, or the smaller, the short truncated version of that is like just ETH. So people often say just ETH. But there's a smaller denomination where it's just like a dollar can be broken up into quarters, can be broken up into dimes and cents, etc. So so there's the blockchain, and then there's the cryptocurrency, the currency itself within that blockchain that has a different name.
So as we talk about building some NFTs for some academic uses, it's using the same technology as these cryptocurrencies, but we're not trying to create a new cryptocurrency. And then there's also NFTs, which themselves, since they're limited, non-fungible, and limited in quantity, they can have value if people create value around them. Again, that's not really what we're talking about here. We're talking about interesting creative uses for them in the academic context.
The way that I've explained that to people before, Mark, is it's like the difference between the internet and a website, right? The internet is built on, or I'm sorry, a website is built on top of the internet, basically. The internet is the fundamental protocol underneath all the stuff that we do online. But like there's websites, there's the texting apps, like there's all kinds of apps built on top of the internet, right? So the blockchain is kind of like the internet, and smart contracts, cryptocurrencies, and these other things are built basically on top of that. And actually, you'll see sometimes this phrase decentralized apps or dApps. And basically all they're talking about there is like these other functionalities that can be built on top of those blockchains. So I think that's a helpful distinction that you bring up there.
And then something else, maybe a use case we haven't discussed, but is interesting, is the decentralized autonomous organizations, DAOs. We could have a whole government that runs off of agreements that were put in place, or you can agree to run a whole aspect of society or a company. There's not even, I think that there's no resolution on the status of a DAO with regard to like as a legal entity. Like that's still an open question.
Yeah, that could go in lots of directions.
I was just thinking about
dystopian and otherwise.
The faculty union contract. We could just, on all of the troubles with that could be turned into a DAO. I don't know.
That's interesting. Huh. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that one. We're kind of getting close to the end here. I do want to sort of bring us back around to this idea of that collaborative document. And I really am hoping that this thing is going to sort of become our perpetual document for a little while, at least anyways, as we talk about these things. But I wanted to make sure that we offered the folks in here a chance to ask questions or make comments or anything like that. So do any of you who've joined us here have questions or comments?
Maureen, go ahead. You should be able to unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you for that presentation and for teaching us the details on NFTs. I had no idea what it was, so I really appreciate that. I have a question regarding indigenous perspective. In one of the case number 5, you said research tied to indigenous communities could see better reciprocal activity if tied to smart contracts. Could you develop on this and maybe give some example on how indigenous community in Alaska could better, access to the university, or how we could help kids in the villages? That's something that I would be very interested in.
I mean, I think one of the things that might need to happen over, the next weeks, months, whatever, is that we need to have deeper conversations about some of these ideas. To be honest with you, Maureen, I don't actually have a lot of details. I just know that extractive research practices are harmful to Indigenous communities, and they're just rude, right? They're not, it's not a great way to have a polite society if we're just going in and extracting things from communities. And you can either sort of punish the offenders, or you can empower the people basically who are suffering under this model. And so to me, it's about empowering Indigenous communities to say, yeah, sure, come in and do research, but we're going to build out this smart contract that if you do this research, you also have to give us something. So that it's a mutually agreed upon arrangement. I mean, it would be better if people were just kind to one another and reciprocated, various things. But I mean, I think it's a great place for us to talk about, how could we actually build this idea out? So I don't have a lot of details there, but I would love to talk to you or anybody else about that in greater detail later.
Okay. One of the things we do here, so I work in the GIS, the Education and Outreach Coordinator. And we work with the different schools in different villages in Alaska, and we create curriculums that is co-produced. So we go to the village, meet with the elders, produce science together that is based on the way they teach in the village. And I bring with me either W9 to be able to thank them for what we do together, or honorariums, or we also offer PD workshops where teachers from the villages get credits. All of this. And so I'm trying to understand how NFTs could be implemented in this perspective to give back.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think that could be a wonderful space for us to talk about innovation.
Okay, we should talk with Charlene Stern and maybe Sean Topcock and other people who work in Brooks office, Brooks building. Okay, thank you so much for that input.
I think that would be a super cool application.
Great, I love that.
Rural Alaska.
And
John,
I see your hand raised. John, over to you.
Thank you. I just a quick question. It seems to me that I'm talking about the NFTs for credentials, like your transcript from a university or something like that. It seems to me in order to make that trustworthy, it has to be associated with an NFT in a trustworthy manner. In other words, I can't just put my own transcript associated with an NFT. That's just like mailing it to an employer or a university. It's the university itself that has to do that, right?
Yes.
So the university would still be involved. I presume I would pay them to do that. And then I guess my question would be, and I'm not as familiar with NFTs, but when it comes to things like cryptocurrencies and stuff, you often have a key, right? You need to find it on the blockchain in order to tell someone to go there and show that it's authentic. And so I hear a lot of stories about people losing their keys or passwords or all of that sort of thing. And so I just curious about your thoughts on that.
Well, somebody might be building, well, I guess, Madera, if you said that people have already got this going on in the academic context, there might already be platforms, and somebody's going to develop the centralized platform for credentials coming out of like universities in the United States or something like that. That's going to happen. We can pressure the university in that direction. We can try to develop that platform ourselves. We can try to use existing platforms. Those are all options. But even just looking into it and getting the university to start thinking about it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't negate the idea of an institution or a person having to drive the initial placement of an NFT onto a blockchain, right? That's always going to be the case. That has to happen. It just sort of cuts out that middleman and makes it more trustworthy and verifiable, or well, trustless, I should say, and verifiable. But yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of room for exploration there. I think a lot of these platforms are trying to, I mean, if I just look at something like Coinbase, right? And I look at the development of Coinbase over time and how keys have been treated in the Bitcoin community over time. I mean, not your keys, not your coin is their favorite phrase, right? And I think there's a lot to that. But I also recognize that I can't even keep track of my passwords, let alone these complicated keys that give me access to things, right? So having building decentralized apps that operate on top of these blockchains, I think is kind of the key there, right? Because by building a decentralized app on top of these things, what you're doing is you're creating something that sort of manages that key process so that you don't have to manage it yourself. So I mean, I'm less informed on the technological specifics there, but I think you're right. Like if I have to remember keys and seed words and all that other stuff, like forget it. I mean, I can't even remember my phone number half the time, you know, like they're going to have to think about this as a human thing. We're very fallible people.
Anybody else have anything? I'm really curious why people are here, what their interests are, if they want to keep being involved. We're gonna keep this going. It's just going to get more important anyhow in the world. So please connect with us now or follow up via email. There's another one of these events on what, Thursday at 5 p.m. Is that right? Or 4 p.m.
Thursday at 4. So, and we might do a slightly different version, but it's really just a space to be able to discuss these. This is a potential direction and what could be done as it's becoming more and more part of what's going to be involved in society and ways that the academic institutions can get involved. It's going to be part of the supply systems and tracking of equipment. How about we do it for rental equipment at the university? How about we do for tracking of equipment from lab to lab or university to university? It's going to be becoming part of that supply chain management. But I just want to thank everybody for their time today. Madara and Naomi, thank you for your explanations and highlighting the different examples and developing the document for us to start collaborating in. So for those listening in, please do fill those out. And as I say, on Thursday, come along, we'll continue this conversation. We'll bring more people into the conversation. Maureen, you said preparing something, maybe a bit of brainstorming over coffee or an evening, a social into that document or over lunch break or something, so we can continue this conversation about what might be the way forward in the next steps as we move into the summer here in Alaska.
Yep.
Yeah. And I just want to, go ahead, Madera.
I just wanted to say, if anybody wants to reach out by email or whatever, I'm happy to continue conversations about this. I'm sure that everybody else in the conversation is here too, Mark and Naomi and Peter as well. Like, we want conversation around this, so please feel free to contact any of us.
Yeah,
Please.
agreed. And I just wanted to also mention the hackathon that we have in mind, that that's another goal that's in the future that we'd like to someday work towards, and that would be actually creating an NFT. So once we have ideas, that's one thing I think that everybody could bring to the table is, you know, an idea as to what we could do for that hackathon. So, and thank you all for your time. Appreciate it.
Appreciate it.